My name is Caroline Hayes, and if you had asked my family growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, I was the disappointment. The Hayes name carried weight in our city. My father, Richard Hayes, served as a decorated Navy captain for 25 years. His office was a shrine of framed commendations, model ships, and photographs from aircraft carriers. To him, service was not just a career, it was a legacy. My mother, Margaret, a history professor at the local college, believed in that legacy as fiercely as he did. At our dinner table, military service was the only currency that mattered. And then there was Danielle, my sister, 3 years older, the golden child. Danielle lived and breathed that legacy. By high school, she already wore her Air Force Academy acceptance like a crown. When she graduated and pinned on her lieutenant's bars, my parents beamed with pride. Every phone call, every holiday, Danielle was the star. Me, I was the ordinary one. I loved puzzles, robotics, and swimming. When I won a state science award for building a drone that monitored coastal erosion, I raced home with the certificate, eager for Dad's approval. He gave it a glance, then turned to Danielle. "How's your prep going for the academy?" he asked, like my accomplishment was no more than a child's drawing. Mom smiled at me politely, but it was pity, not pride. Danielle smirked. "Caroline's little gadgets won't get her anywhere," she said, and the table laughed like it was a harmless joke. It wasn't harmless. By the time I reached high school, I had set swim records and led my debate team to nationals. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had earned my place. I came home clutching a gleaming state swim trophy. Dad barely looked at it. "Swimming's nice, Caroline, but it's not a career," he said before asking Danielle about her Air Force summer training. Danielle leaned back with her usual grin. "Stick to something practical, Caroline. Leave the real work to me." I remember standing in the kitchen that night, trophy in hand, and hearing their voices through the thin walls. "She's always been different," Mom whispered. "Different isn't enough," Dad replied. "Danielle makes us proud. Caroline is just lost." That word, lost, seared into me. But instead of breaking me, it lit a fire. I promised myself that one day, somehow, I would prove I wasn't the family failure. When college brochures came, Dad laid out glossy pamphlets for Annapolis on the dining table. "With our Navy connections, you'll have every advantage," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. But I wanted a different path. I chose Georgia Tech to study cyber engineering. The silence that followed was heavy. Mom forced a strained smile. Dad only muttered, "At least it's close to DC." Danielle rolled her eyes. "Georgia Tech? You're settling. You could have been like me." That was the moment I knew. I would never earn their approval walking in Danielle's shadow. If I wanted to become something more, I had to carve my own path, even if it meant walking alone. Georgia Tech became my escape, though my parents treated it like a consolation prize. Danielle strutted through holidays in her crisp Air Force uniform, while I came home with circuit boards, projects, and computer models my family barely glanced at. At Christmas dinner one year, my father raised a toast to Danielle's first deployment. He turned to me only once, asking dryly, "How's school?" When I explained I was building a predictive program for cyber threats, he nodded like I'd mentioned a knitting club. To them, I wasn't a warrior. I was the kid sister tinkering in the background. But something else was stirring in me. My professors saw it before my family ever could. One of them, Dr. Lewis, pulled me aside after class. "Caroline, you think like a tactician, not just an engineer. Have you considered service?" The thought gnawed at me. I wanted to prove myself, not to win Danielle's approval, but to silence that word my father had stamped on me, lost. So after graduation, I shocked them. "I've joined the Navy," I announced at the dinner table, sliding my acceptance letter into the silence. Dad raised an eyebrow. "What kind of desk job?" His tone dripped with dismissal. "Naval intelligence," I replied evenly, sticking to the vague cover story I'd been instructed to use. Danielle snorted. "Good luck pushing papers while I'm flying missions." Mom gave me a thin smile. "At least it's stable," she said, as if I'd just applied for a clerk's position. They had no idea what storm I was walking into. During my first months, while working under the cover of naval intelligence, I was assigned to assist in a high-level cyber exercise. We simulated an attack on a naval network. Midway through, I rerouted the assault, patched vulnerabilities, and executed a counterstrike in real time. When the system came back online, the room was silent except for one man's voice. Who handled that response? The man was Commander Blake, a grizzled veteran with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through excuses. I raised my hand, cautious. Ensign Hayes, sir. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. You think fast under pressure. Ever considered special warfare? I blinked. Everyone knew the SEALs were the ultimate impossible club. That's not open to women, I said automatically. Not officially, he replied, lowering his voice. But policies are shifting. A pilot program is forming. It's brutal and most won't last. But I think you've got what it takes. My pulse roared in my ears. This was my chance, not just to prove myself, but to carve out a place no one could belittle. I signed up. From that moment, my life split in two. To my family, I was a quiet officer pushing papers in a Navy office. In reality, I was training in secrecy for one of the most punishing programs on Earth. And for the first time in my life, I felt alive. The first morning of SEAL selection began before dawn, in the cold Atlantic surf off the coast of Florida. The instructors barked orders, their voices sharp as gunfire. Hit the water! We dove into waves that felt like knives, lungs seizing against the shock. I told myself to keep moving, one stroke at a time. By the end of the first week, half of the candidates had quit. Most were men who had trained their whole lives for this. Yet here I was, Caroline Hayes, the nobody from Charleston, still standing. The resentment was thick. One candidate, Harris, smirked at me during gear drills. Go home, sweetheart, he sneered. This isn't Girl Scouts. I didn't reply. Instead, I beat his time in navigation drills and swam laps until his face turned red trying to keep up. The instructors noticed, though they never praised. Their approval was silence, and silence became my fuel. But not every day was victory. Some nights I lay in my bunk, muscles trembling, raw blisters stinging with salt water. Danielle's voice echoed in my head like poison. You're wasting your life. The doubt gnawed at me, whispering she was right. That doubt nearly broke me during pool comp, the underwater confidence test. The instructors waited until I was deep below, then twisted my regulator hose into knots. Air cut off, panic clawed at my chest. The world shrank to darkness and pressure. I clawed at the hose, lungs burning, the edges of my vision narrowing. For a second, I thought about bolting to the surface, ringing the bell, quitting. Then Danielle's face came to me, smirking at our dinner table, telling me I was nothing. No. I forced my hands steady, untangling the knots one by one until the regulator cleared. I drew in a thin, glorious breath. When I surfaced, gasping, Lieutenant Maria Cortez, the only other woman in my squad, grabbed my shoulder. You held longer than half the men, she whispered fiercely. Don't you dare doubt yourself again. Maria became my anchor. Together we pushed through obstacle courses, freezing swims, and endless drills. We leaned on each other when exhaustion threatened to break us. Then came Hell Week, the crucible. 5 days, less than 4 hours of sleep total. We carried logs through crashing waves, staggered under boats strapped to our heads, and endured instructors screaming until their voices cracked. By night 3, men were quitting left and right, the sound of the bell tolling in the distance like a funeral. On one brutal night, our boat team was down to 4 after 2 men collapsed. Waves slammed us, sand burned our skin, and the boat felt heavier than stone. My arms screamed, my knees buckled. But something in me snapped into command. Switch sides, Martinez left, Collins right, pace steady. My voice was raw, but it cut through chaos. We locked in, moved as one, and pushed past 2 other teams. When dawn broke, Chief Instructor Perry gave me a single nod. No words, just that slight dip of his head. It was more respect than I'd ever gotten from my father. By the end of the program, only a fraction of us remained. Out of 8 women, just 3 survived. I was one of them. Standing there on graduation day, muscles aching, uniforms soaked with sweat, I realized something. Danielle's cruelty had forged me. Every insult had become a weapon I used to fight through fire. I wasn't a nobody. I was becoming the very thing they said I could never be. Graduation from Buds wasn't followed by parades or family hugs. There were no photos to send home. The program was classified, hidden even from those closest to us. My orders simply said Naval Intelligence, a bland cover that explained my absence while concealing the truth. To my parents, I was tucked away in an office, filing reports. To Danielle, I was living proof of mediocrity. "At least you've got steady pay," she teased one Thanksgiving, lifting her champagne glass. Meanwhile, I'm briefing generals. The guests at the table chuckled. I forced a smile and swallowed my anger. In reality, while she was boasting at dinner parties, I was leading a fire team in the mountains of Somalia, coordinating an extraction under gunfire. Our mission logs were hidden under layers of security clearances. Our successes whispered in closed-door briefings, never in headlines. I carried bruises, scars, and memories I couldn't share. My first mission nearly ended before it began. We were tasked with rescuing a group of American contractors held by a militia. The intel route collapsed within minutes. Our exfil point compromised, enemy closing fast. Panic rippled through the team. Daniels, one of the toughest operators, glanced at me sharply. "What now, ma'am?" For a moment, my mind went blank. The sound of Danielle's voice came back. "You're wasting your life." I shoved it away. My training kicked in. I scanned the map, spotted a dry riverbed leading toward a secondary LZ. "We're moving northeast, riverbed cover," I barked. "Keep comms dark, double pace." No one argued. We moved. Hours later, dust whipped around us as the chopper blades cut through the dawn. We loaded the contractors alive. Daniels turned to me on the flight back, his face streaked with sweat and soot. "Good call, Commander," he said. "Would have been a bloodbath otherwise." It wasn't praise I wore on my sleeve, but inside something shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the underestimated younger daughter. I was the officer whose orders meant survival. Yet the secrecy cut deep. Every time my phone buzzed with family messages, I had to lie. "Busy week. Just paperwork." Or, "Sorry, can't visit. Reports are piling up." Mom would send back worried notes about me working too hard. Dad stopped asking altogether. Danielle kept sending barbed texts. "Still pushing papers? Hope they give you a raise for all that typing." I let her think it. Better she laugh at a shadow than glimpse the fire. But at night, lying awake after another mission, I wondered how long I could live in two worlds. The one where I was mocked as a nobody, and the one where I carried men's lives in my hands. Danielle's promotion invitation arrived in my inbox weeks after I returned from a grueling mission in North Africa. My body was still aching from days in the desert, sandstorms that cut like glass, nights with no sleep, adrenaline pounding through firefights. And yet, the message flashing on my phone was what made my stomach clench. Major Danielle Hayes, promotion ceremony, Washington, D.C. I almost deleted it. Another night of polished uniforms, clinking glasses, and my family parading Danielle as their crown jewel. But then my mother called, her voice warm but pleading. "Caroline, she's your sister. Please come. It would mean the world to me." Against every instinct, I booked a flight. The ballroom in D.C. gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble, banners of red, white, and blue draped across the stage. Officers in Air Force dress blues and Navy whites mingled with family friends, political aides, and retired brass. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Mom spotted me first, her smile wide as she pulled me into a hug. "You made it," she whispered, relief in her tone. Dad offered a curt nod, already absorbed in conversation with an admiral. Danielle, radiant in her crisp uniform, swept into view like a queen. "Well, well," she said, her voice carrying just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I didn't think the Navy desk jockey would show." My jaw tightened, but I forced a polite smile. "It keeps me busy." She turned to a cluster of officers beside her, gesturing toward me. "This is my sister, Caroline. Works in Naval Intelligence. Probably spends her days filing reports while I'm briefing generals." Laughter bubbled around us. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. Years of SEAL discipline kept my face calm. Mom stepped in, flustered. "Danielle, not now." This is your night. Danielle smirked, basking in the attention. Exactly. My night. I slipped away to a corner, nursing a glass of wine, letting the music drown out the sting. Around me, guests toasted Danielle, praised her meteoric rise. Dad raised his glass high. To my daughter, Major Hayes, carrying the Hayes name with honor. Applause echoed. I stared into my glass, remembering the men I'd dragged bleeding from ambushes, the missions that never made it to any toast. Across the table, Danielle's boyfriend, Captain James Whitaker, kept stealing glances at me. His eyes narrowed, studying my face with an intensity that made my chest tighten. I avoided his gaze, but his attention only sharpened. Why was he looking at me like that? The dinner stretched on, a blur of speeches and laughter that felt like daggers. Danielle glowed under the spotlight, basking in praise that had always come so easily to her. And me? I was once again the family's shadow, the afterthought, the nobody. But James's stare never wavered. I had a sinking feeling he knew something no one else in that room did. And before the night ended, the truth would break the walls of that ballroom wide open. The ballroom was alive with chatter, champagne glasses clinking, the orchestra swelling as desserts were served. Danielle had just finished her toast, eloquent, polished, dripping with pride. She raised her glass high, eyes gliding right over me as though I were invisible. Guests applauded, cameras flashed, and I told myself I could survive one more evening as the family's ghost. Then it happened. Captain James Whitaker, Danielle's boyfriend, pushed back his chair so abruptly the scrape cut through the music. Conversations faltered. He straightened, heels clicking together, his face solemn. Then he saluted. "Commander Hayes," he said, his voice ringing clear through the hall. "It's an honor, ma'am." The room froze. Forks clattered against plates. Glasses wavered midair. My father's expression drained to stone. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Danielle's glass slipped, red wine spilling across the white tablecloth like blood. Heat surged up my neck. My heart pounded so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. "Captain," I said carefully, "you must be mistaken." But James didn't lower his hand. "No, ma'am. I'd recognize you anywhere. You led the SEAL team that saved my unit in Yemen last year. 20 men walked out alive because of you." Whispers rippled through the guests. "SEAL? Commander?" Heads turned, Danielle's face twisted in fury. "Are you insane?" she snapped, glaring at James. "Caroline files papers in an office. She is not a SEAL. Tell him, Caroline." My throat tightened, but years of discipline steadied me. I rose slowly, my chair silent against the polished floor. Instinct kicked in, my hand returning James's salute with crisp precision. "At ease, Captain," I said, voice even, though my pulse thundered. Gasps echoed, every eye locked on me. James lowered his hand, his face unwavering. "You split your unit to draw fire and opened a path for us. Without you, we'd be dead. I owe you my life, Commander." My father's jaw clenched. "Explain yourself, Caroline. Now." His voice had the sharp edge of an interrogation. Mom's eyes brimmed with tears. "All those deployments, you were in danger and we never knew?" Danielle slammed her hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. She's lying to make me look stupid. Women aren't SEALs." I met her glare head on. For the first time in years, I didn't shrink from it. "He's not wrong, Danielle," I said, my tone sharp as steel. "I've been a SEAL officer for 6 years. Commander of a special operations team for the last 2. The silence was deafening. For years, I had lived behind shadows and lies. But in that ballroom, before my family, before my sister who had called me a nobody, the truth had finally detonated. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Danielle's chest rose and fell in sharp, furious breaths. My father's hands were clenched at his sides, his navy posture stiff as stone. My mother sat trembling, eyes darting between us like she'd slipped into a nightmare. Captain Whitaker's voice cut the silence. "With respect, Major Hayes, your sister isn't lying. She's the reason I'm standing here tonight. She's the reason you're standing here too." Danielle blinked. "What?" James turned to me, his jaw tight, then back to her. That operation in Yemen, Aleppo province, last summer? The ambush near the border? You were the intelligence officer for our unit. Your team provided the data, but you were pinned down in the chaos. Commander Hayes' team fought through enemy fire, split their force, and dragged us out. We survived because of her. The words detonated like a grenade. Danielle's mouth opened, but no sound came. She staggered back a step, her face pale, eyes wide as if the chandeliers above had collapsed. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." I said nothing. I didn't have to. My silence was confirmation enough. Mom gasped, her hand gripping the edge of the table. "Caroline, you saved your sister?" I swallowed hard. Images of that night flashed in my mind. Bullets tearing through the dark, men screaming, smoke thick in my lungs. I hadn't known Danielle was there. I had only known we had to get them all out. "Yes, ma'am," James said softly, answering for me. "She saved us all. Without her, Major Hayes wouldn't be alive today." Danielle's hands shook as she pressed them against the tablecloth, leaving red streaks where the spilled wine had pooled. Her voice cracked. "All this time, I called you nothing. I told everyone you were useless, and you... Her words broke. Swallowed by sobs she tried to choke down. For years, I had dreamed of this moment. My sister stripped of her arrogance, forced to see me for who I was. But watching her crumble didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief, like a wound finally torn open. "You never wanted to see me," I said quietly, my voice carrying through the still room. "You decided I was a failure before I ever had a chance to prove otherwise. I stopped trying to change your mind years ago." Dad's eyes shifted to me, the hard edge gone. His voice when it came was rough but softer than I had ever heard. "Caroline, we misjudged you." Mom's tears fell freely now. "We should have seen you. We should have believed in you." Danielle finally lifted her eyes to mine, her voice raw. "I was jealous. All this time I thought I carried the Hayes name. But you carried lives. You carried me." The weight of her words hung between us. For the first time in our lives, Danielle wasn't the golden child, and I wasn't the forgotten shadow. We were two sisters standing on the same battlefield of truth. The night ended with more silence than celebration. The chandeliers still glowed, the orchestra still played, but the mood had fractured. Guests whispered, unsure if they should clap for Danielle's new rank or for the revelation that had just changed everything. I slipped outside into the cool Washington air, needing a breath away from the stairs. My phone buzzed. A secure line. I stepped into the shadows of the hotel courtyard and answered. "Commander Hayes," came Commander Blake's clipped voice. "We need you back. Transport leaves from Andrews at 0600. Situation classified." "Copy that," I said. The familiar shift slid into place, mission mode, duty first. Back inside, my family waited. Dad stood apart, shoulders tense as if he were facing down a storm. Mom's eyes were still red from crying. Danielle sat rigid, her glass untouched. "Duty calls," I said quietly. Mom's face crumpled. "Already? Can't you stay a little longer?" I shook my head. "This can't wait." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my father did something I never expected. He pulled his old Navy jacket from his arm, pinned with the medals he hadn't worn in years. Standing tall, his voice steady, he raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Commander Hayes?" My throat tightened. I returned the salute, not as his daughter desperate for approval, but as an officer who had finally earned it. Mom came next, pulling me into her arms. "We were blind," she whispered, "but we see you now. Please, come back safe." Then Danielle rose, her expression raw. She hesitated, as if the words tasted foreign. "Caroline, I'm proud of you." I studied her face, the same sister who once laughed at my dreams, who called me nothing at every holiday dinner. But in her eyes now I saw guilt, yes, but also a crack of something new. Respect, maybe even love. "I never needed your approval," I said gently. "I only needed to know I was enough for myself, but Thank you. At dawn, I packed my bag, slipping into the waiting transport. As the city faded below, I stared out at the horizon, the weight of years lifting. For so long, I'd been branded the forgotten daughter, the shadow, the nobody. But in the end, it was in the silence of classified missions, in the fire of choices no one ever saw, that I became somebody. And if there was one lesson I carried with me, it was this: your worth is not measured by those who doubt you. It's forged by what you choose to fight for, even when no one is watching.